Well, as war with the U.S. and Israel nears the 60-day mark, Iran's tone is becoming increasingly defiant. According to state media, the country's supreme leader is warning there's no place for foreign forces except, quote, the depths of its water. Mojtaba Khamenei hasn't been seen publicly now in 7 weeks.
And a senior military official has reportedly threatened to respond to further U.S. bombing with long and painful strikes. Iran's top judge is also making inflammatory statements too, claiming executions reflect legitimate demands of the people.
Karim Sadjadpour is a CNN Global Affairs analyst, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and the man I turn to for all things Iran-related. Karim, great to have you on the program as well. So once again, we hear from the Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei claiming that the grip on the strait will bring economic progress. When we look at the reality, though, in Iran right now, inflation is at 70%. The rial hit a record low. Is his threshold for pain at this point higher than his father's, or is this a scenario where they're really starting to feel the squeeze? How are you interpreting this?
It's a great question, Biana, and what's significant is that we haven't seen Mojtaba Khamenei since he was named Supreme Leader, and we haven't even heard his voice. So that unto itself is pretty significant, that ostensibly the most powerful man in Iran hasn't been seen or heard from. And his messages publicly are always bellicose, always projecting strength. But in reality, when you speak to people in Tehran, this is a society and an economy which even before this war had been decimated. We saw last January massive national protests because of the country's increasing economic bankruptcy. And obviously this war has only amplified those economic vulnerabilities. So there is a huge gap here between Iran's public statements projecting strength and confidence and the realities of an economy which is really floundering.
As we know, President Trump is set to receive a briefing from U.S. Central Command, just really on the military options in terms of dealing with Iran. Karim, can you hear me? Because I saw you touch your earpiece there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So just in terms of what those options, A, are, and B, what is actually going to get Iran back to the negotiation table in a way that allows the U.S. to have the most leverage. What makes sense in terms of President Trump's options at this point? Because obviously this is an existential threat for Iran, and that means that they are going to be willing to hold on for as long as it takes.
So Zain, the way I think about this, the metaphor I think about is essentially two adversaries with their hands on one another's throats. Iran is trying to choke the global economy. It's obviously, its entire strategy is to spike the price of oil. So American citizens will put pressure on President Trump to end this war. And in retaliation, President Trump has his hands on Iran's throat, trying to choke the Iranian economy and trying to force this regime to capitulate. And the process it's obviously a test of wills, it's a test of resolve. And that process on its own could take many more weeks, if not months. And so I think President Trump is trying to expedite that process, trying to get Iran to the negotiating table by threatening more military action. It doesn't seem, however, that there are going to be any silver bullets which quickly end this war. My view is that we're probably looking at months ahead of this test of resolve. And even when and if we get back to the negotiating table, we're probably looking at months of negotiations based on what we know of 47-year history of Iran's negotiating posture.
And as we've heard from the Secretary of State, the President himself, Iran, they're very capable, very good negotiators given all of their years of experience. There's reports of perhaps a new proposal that Iran will be presenting as soon as Friday. But Karim, going back to your earlier point that we have yet to see or hear from Mojtaba Khamenei at this point, so many weeks later, does that tell you, are you hearing from sources, because there are rumors that he may not even be alive or be in a position of making decisions? And if he's not the one making decisions, is it the IRGC head, Ahmed Vahidi, who is in charge right now?
So, Biana, as an institution, the institution that is ruling Iran now is the Revolutionary Guards. When this regime began in 1979, it was the clergy, the clerics who were ruling Iran. And over the last 2 decades, the country has transformed from a clerical dictatorship to a military dictatorship. Now, when Mojtaba's father, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was ruling, he was still at the top of that power pyramid. It was a cleric ruling Iran, but all of his most important appointees were Revolutionary Guard commanders. Now, what is frankly not clear from afar is to what extent is Mojtaba actively involved in major decisions. We don't really know the state of his health. There's a lot of mixed rumors about that. But yes, indeed, we know that Ahmad Vahidi, Revolutionary Guard commander, is an important player. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, current Speaker of Parliament. When you look at, let's say, the top 10 or 15 men ruling Iran, probably 2/3, 3/4 of them are men who have military backgrounds, not clerics. And one additional thing I'd like to say here, Biana, is that when people talk about the Iranian regime being great negotiators, my response to that is that it's easy to be a tough negotiator when you don't care about the well-being of your people. If you're willing to subject your people to enormous hardship rather than make any compromise, well, you could say that's being a tough negotiator, but you're not really advancing the interests or well-being of your nation.
I do want to read you a statement we just got in a few minutes ago. This is from the new Supreme Leader in Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei, who put out a statement. I should say it's on paper. It's a paper statement. We still have not seen him for the entire duration of this conflict. But he talked about Iran entering a new stage on the Strait of Hormuz. We said we and our neighbors across the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman share a common destiny. And foreign actors who come from thousands of kilometers away with greedy intentions have no place here except in the depths of the waters. This chain of victories achieved by the grace of God and through the policies of resistance and the strategy of strong Iran marks the beginning of a new regional and global order. What do you think he's saying here, and what does it mean for the next weeks, months, years in the Strait of Hormuz?
Look, the goals of this war in Iran were not clearly set from the beginning. President Trump talked a lot about regime change. And instead, by killing the Ayatollah, what he's gotten is Ayatollah 2.0, his son, angrier, more determined to resist, and a more repressive IRGC rather than regime change. And what the new Ayatollah statement is suggesting is that they now know they've got a new weapon. Their ability to close the Strait of Hormuz and impact the economy of the world, not just the United States, is every bit as powerful a weapon in the hands of the Ayatollah and his repressive and brutal regime as would be a potential nuclear weapon. So he's threatening Donald Trump. He knows that we don't have the capacity to withstand months and months, maybe years of oil soaring and of the other costs that the closing of the Strait of Hormuz are imposing. It's spring planting time. Fertilizer costs are going up. Helium's necessary for semiconductor manufacturing. That's also critically comes through the Strait of Hormuz. John, the Ayatollah, is flexing his muscles. And even though President Trump thinks that they've been beaten, declares this war over and a military success, the Ayatollah is making it clear that his regime intends to resist. It's frankly alarming that they are determined to continue to resist, but utterly unsurprising.
Nic, there is a blockade on a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, and that is having an enormous impact on the price of oil, of gas, of other petrochemical products. We know this. The global economy is suffering as a result of it. What more are we learning today about Iran's thinking and US thinking about what happens next?
Yeah, you're right. It's a blockade on a blockade, and both sides thinking they're putting pain, economic pain, on the other side, and both sides are thinking the other side's going to crack under this pain first. President Trump from these the economic pain of the escalating impact on the global economy and on the price of gas, the pumps and forecourts in the United States, and the language has been very uncompromising and tough. The Iranian leadership today is celebrating what it's calling National Persian Gulf Day. It's the day they're celebrating when they liberated the Persian Gulf and their occupation as they saw it from the Portuguese 400 or so years ago, 1622. And to that point, there have been statements from the Supreme Leader, or statements that purport to come from him. And absolutely, the Strait of Hormuz and what happens to it is at the core of that. You know, he points to the Portuguese occupation and points at the Americans today and says that's pretty much the same thing. They're greedy. They're coming here to take what's ours, and the place for them is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. He goes on to point out the Gulf countries, by the way, that you had US bases, but they didn't provide you security. But I think the line here that really circles back and doubles down on what we've heard from Iranian leaders before is the notion that Iran wants to have new economic controls over the Strait of Hormuz. He calls them administration, that he says will bring economic benefit for the Iranians. And I think, you know, there's a sort of a trolling backwards and forwards as well. You've heard from the Speaker of the Parliament, the chief negotiator, Ghalibaf. He has put on X a tweet that's aimed at Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary in the US, and said, look, 3 days our wells didn't explode. Of course, the theory was blockade the Strait of Hormuz, Iran couldn't export its oil, therefore it couldn't store it all, therefore it would have problems in its oil fields, sort of containing and stopping the flow. He said you could put a webcam on there for 30 years, and for 30 days rather, and that wouldn't show the blowing up of the wells there. And he said, so that advice from Scott Bessent, he called it junk advice. Look at the price of a barrel of oil now. He said $120. So there's really trolling this issue of the Strait of Hormuz, the blockade on a blockade, the pain on the pain. That's where it stands right now, Becky.